Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in a minute or two. Let people have time to join the webinar. You'll see a couple points of order in the chat. We are recording this. The recording will be available afterwards. And the recording can be accessed at the same link that you used to join the webinar. Zoom has a Q&A feature. And so if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A feature. And we're going to answer questions once we're done showing everything we have. So like 20 or 30 minutes from now or so. We'll wait about another 30 seconds, give people a chance to join, and then we'll dive in. All right, Rohan, should I pass it to you?
Yep. All right. Welcome to the webinar, everybody. I am Rohan Vazirker. I am a senior software engineer at SpectraOps. Andy, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Andy Robbins. I'm principal product architect for BloodHound CE and for BloodHound Enterprise. Used to do red teaming, and before that did the IT admin, sysadmin, break fix stuff before that.
All right, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about BloodHound CE today. BloodHound CE was released last week, I believe on Tuesday, and it represents a very big step forward for BloodHound for us. So we are very excited to share it with you. We are aware that we are not in presentation mode. We chose to do this on purpose just to make it easier to switch back and forth between windows. All right, so just covering the agenda today, we will start with what is BloodHound for those of you who aren't familiar with it, and then we'll move on to some of the new features, starting with ease of setup, new features in the GUI, and the new API that we've exposed. So what is BloodHound? For those who aren't familiar with it, BloodHound is an attack path analysis tool that was released in 2016. We wrote this tool as a solution to a very tedious problem that we kept running into on pen testing engagements. We and other people in the industry came up with a very consistent, reliable methodology, which allowed us to escalate in AD environments. But it was very, very slow to run through. It involved a lot of data collection and a lot of very high-tech tools such as Excel pivot tables or throwing a whole bunch of data into Notepad and cross-referencing them. The whole process during pen tests would take up a whole week, or if not most of the pen test, just trying to escalate. And we were looking for a better way. So BloodHound was our solution to this problem. It allows penetration testers to discover, analyze, and execute attack paths in both Active Directory and Azure as well. Our analogy we like to use, it's kind of like Google Maps for Active Directory and Azure. All right, so the first major thing and one of my favorite parts of BloodHound CE is the new setup. If anybody here has ever had the joy of setting up the legacy version of BloodHound, you know that setting up Neo4j can be a little bit tedious. There's a lot of questions around, what version needs to be used, getting everything set up correctly. And we're happy to say that you don't have to do any of that anymore. The new setup for BloodHound is fully containerized. You can actually run all of BloodHound CE with a single command, provided you have Docker installed. And this is the command right here. We'll give you guys a second to take a picture of this, note this down, whatever you'd like to do. But this command has also been shared on Twitter. So if you, or sorry, I should say X now. So if you, I think Andy will drop it in chat, and
Yeah.
And just to show you guys, how simple and quick this is to set up compared to the previous version, Andy actually took a video of start to finish setting up the new BloodHound CE with Docker.
Yeah, so I will share that window, and bear with me as I do that. Let's see. Yeah, so you should now see this BloodHound CE one-liner.mp4 file. At the bottom here, I've got my Mac OS terminal, and at the top, I've got Chrome running. So here's that one-liner that we pasted in the chat and that you can also see in the slide deck. So I'll hit play, and this is going to go pretty quick. This whole video is just about 40 seconds long. Running that command, it downloads the Docker Compose file, and then it pipes the result of that to Docker Compose up and lets Docker Compose do its thing to stand up BloodHound. And it's done. So default passwords are bad. Rohan and I, we did pen tests and red teams long enough to know that no matter how well you try to protect a default password, they're just never a good idea. So there is not a default password. This password is randomly generated when you create BloodHound CE. And so you will copy this, and then in your browser, navigate to localhost on 8080. The username is admin, and the password is what you just copied out of your terminal. You'll need to update this password to something that complies with these password requirements. It cannot be the same password as the initial password. And that's it. You're in. So that took 39 seconds. This is now the fastest demo that we have, is the initial setup. And this used to be the most painful and longest demo that we could possibly do. So let me go back to the slide deck. And I think actually this is coming back to me. So the next thing we'll talk about is the GUI. And I have a GUI running up here in this other tab, which y'all should be able to see okay. BloodHound now runs as a web application. And so you access it with a browser. You can also access it with an API client, which we will talk about later. So let's just kind of go through a tour of the GUI, and Rohan, jump in whenever you want. And if you have a question along the way, please use the Q&A feature to ask that question. If you've used BloodHound in the past, you'll notice that a lot of things are very familiar. Most of the screen real estate is dedicated to rendering the visuals of a graph. And then we have search up here in the top left. We used to have entity information on the left as well. We've moved that over to the right for several different design reasons that I can go into if people are interested. So searching for a node works the same way as it basically always has. Let's say I want to look for the domain admins. I type domain admins. I get a auto-populated list of suggestions, and I can click on this to get my domain admins. Then if I want to see information about this node, I click on the node to see the entity panel over here on the right that tells me this is the SID, this is the DN, this is the FQDN of the domain the principal resides in, this is the SID of the domain the principal resides in, and then also when was the last time this object was collected by BloodHound. And this is calculated by the last time that the object was inserted into the database. And I can show you how that works too. This is a test data set. Obviously, we're not going to show any real customer information. And that comes with some strengths and some weaknesses. A strength is that we can show it very freely, but a weakness is that it doesn't always have, the most representative information. So usually domain admins, you're going to have sessions. In our test data set, we don't, but we do have members. And in Legacy BloodHound, you would click on this and you would just get the graph representation of the result of this query showing who are the principals that have been added to this group, either directly or through nested group memberships. Now, any of these accordion items that you click on, it will show you not only the graph representation to say, here's this user, which is a member of the group, but you also will have a list of all of the resultant relevant nodes from that query as well. This becomes really handy when the GUI, is showing hundreds or thousands of nodes, or even, as an example here, there's 102 objects that the domain admins group has control of. That's pretty obvious that domain admins will have control of things, but just to illustrate, these graphs can start to become kind of unwieldy once there are so many nodes shown on the screen. So having the ability to come over here and scroll through the results is really handy if you're just trying to find something at a glance, or maybe you see something that shouldn't be there. Domain admins should have control of everything, but what if you're looking at what domain users has control of? Well, it shouldn't be anything, but if you do have results there, it's a lot easier to scroll through this list to see the results than it is to hunt and peck and zoom in, zoom out, just using the graph layout.
As another really fun bonus that we added in, if you're familiar with some of the bigger queries that BloodHound has done in the past, like transitive object control, derivative local admin rights, there can be queries that take quite a while to run. A lot of these queries have been optimized to be a lot faster in BHCE, but on top of that, we actually added in-memory caching. So anytime you open one of these expandos and it takes longer than 5 seconds to load the query, the results of the query will be cached in memory, so they will be instantaneous to load afterwards. The cache will stay in memory until you either close out of BloodHound or you ingest new data, at which point the cache gets invalidated, just to make sure you don't see old data when you're looking at stuff, and it just continues on from there.
Yeah. We also pre-populate some of those caches as well. So domain admins having control of things. This is one of the ones that's pre-cached for you. So if this is going to take a long time, hopefully you shouldn't ever notice that. And it should be just as fast as what you see me doing here whenever you load this up. Something else to point out here is if you wanted to know more information about one of these particular edges, you would right click on the edge and hit help, and that would pop a modal that would give you OPSEC, abuse info, references, all that kind of stuff. It's a lot easier now. Instead of right clicking, just left click. And now there is a relationship information panel. And so this tells you all the same stuff that you used to see with Legacy BloodHound. But it's easier to look at. It doesn't take up your entire screen. And in the future, this is a lot easier for us to expand as we add new edges, as we want to have more information. It makes the development side way easier. And I think the UX is better as well. So right owner general just tells you kind of a TLDR of what this actually means. How you do this abuse from a Windows operating system using PowerView, for example. How you can do this from Linux with various tooling. What OPSEC considerations there can be, including what Windows Event ID could be created when performing this attack. And then references that you can look at for more information, or if you're writing up a finding for a customer, you may want to include these references in your finding, or lean on some of these references for information that can help your customer remediate the issue. So let's take a look at pathfinding. Pathfinding works a little bit differently now. The biggest difference is now you just click on Pathfinding instead of clicking the expando from the legacy BloodHound interface. And Pathfinding works otherwise basically the exact same. So let's say I want to start off at a user called right owner test, and I want to target this user here, administrator at testlab.local. Okay, that tells me I don't have a path. That might be because, so this is because I have a particular edge type filtered out. So edge filtering also works a little bit differently. You access that now with this little filter button. So click on this filter button, and this will bring up the path edge filtering modal. And here you can select which edges you want to include versus not include in your pathfinding search. This only applies to the pathfinding search. It doesn't apply to any of the other queries that the tool runs, just pathfinding. So we have these organized by platform. So within Active Directory, we've got this broken out into different categories: structure, lateral movement, credential access, etc. And this icon right here tells me that I have something that is deselected, and that is GP-Link. So I will select GP-Link. Now this edge will be included in pathfinding after I hit apply. I'll hit apply, and then now I do have an attack path starting from the right owner test user, going through a GPO, to the domain head, to the default users container, and then to the RID 500 account in the domain. You can also reverse the order and swap the start node and end node with this little button right here. This will be pretty obvious with, the RID 500 is obviously going to have a path to anything in the same domain. But where this becomes really powerful is when you're looking at cross-forest or cross-domain attack paths. You may be looking from domain users in one domain to domain users in the other domain, and you'll be able to flip that really easily to make that analysis a lot faster and a lot more comprehensive. Let's next talk about Cypher and pre-built queries. So you can execute your own Cypher queries using the Cypher input box here. This box can be resized, so it's easier to see, what your entire query is. And as an example, we can say, let me find just every user labeled node, and that will return all the user labeled nodes. This will render way, way, way faster than legacy BloodHound ever could. And so you can draw hundreds, thousands of nodes, and they will render essentially instantly. Coming soon, we will have syntax highlighting and autocomplete in this feature as well. So if you're not as comfortable writing Cypher, you'll have hints that will make it easier for you to write these statements or to learn the query language. So as another example, we can say, just show me the shortest path between any user labeled node. Well, actually, let's just do any node, traversing any edge type to a group where the group ends with 512. Or in other words, give me the shortest path to any domain admin's group, and then return me those paths. We'll hit search. It says an error occurred. I don't know exactly why. Let's constrain that to the user type labeled node. Okay, so I might have a bug to fix. And so here's what the result looks like. You can change the layout. I prefer this layout where it's reading from left to right. Some people do prefer the force directed layout like this. You can use whichever one you want. This is a pretty basic view of shortest paths to the domain admins group. This becomes way, way, way more complicated. The larger the data sets are and the more the more information that you get. Pre-built queries. So pre-built queries are still here. They are accessed by hitting this little folder icon right here. So here are the pre-built queries. They are broken out again by platform, Active Directory and Azure. So under Active Directory, we have a lot of the same pre-built queries that Legacy BloodHound had, plus more. So for example, just let me find all domain admins. That's a pretty basic one that works as you would expect. Map domain trusts. So if there are domains and they have trust relationships, you can render them like this. And this makes SID hopping analysis and golden ticket analysis way easier when you're on a red team. A lot of these, because it's a test data set, they're not going to show results. However, one of the really cool ones that we've added is, let me see where in the OU hierarchy a high value or otherwise tier 0 object resides. So when you click on this, this will show you all of the nodes that are marked as high value or are marked as being within tier 0, and then where in the OU structure they actually reside. This is a very basic example of, from our test lab, how this can look. In reality, these objects are usually scattered all across the OU tree, and that can cause all kinds of problems with permissions inheritance maybe being enabled on some OUs and not others, with group policy, certainly that comes into play. And so if you're on the red team side, this view can help you to recommend to your customer, hey, you've got a user that's in some random OU over here, but they are a domain admin and they're not in the same OU as all your other domain admins. So you should move that user over into this OU to make management of that user more consistent, to make protection of that user more effective, to make group policy management simpler to understand as far as how group policy affects the most important principles in the directory.
Another interesting little feature that was added was we added sanitation of cipher statements. So in an effort to prevent people from kind of foot gunning themselves with cipher, we've made it so the cipher input here will disallow any update statements that are done to the graph. So no deleting, no updating nodes, nothing of that sort can be done through the cipher endpoint. You'll get a nice little error that says updating clauses are not supported. Obviously, if you want to still muck around in your database, you can do so using the Neo4j interface directly. But if you're familiar with Cypher, you know that Cypher does actually have RCE capabilities. So disallowing any procedure calls or injection was a important thing that we had to do to protect against potential attacks.
Yeah. And like Rohan said, this is running on your system. And so the Docker Compose file by default won't expose the Neo4j ports, but you can change that so that Neo4j is accessible to you directly. And then with that, you have all the access that you could ever want or need to do write operations, to clear the database, to patch a particular node, whatever you want. But this harness provides important safety guardrails so that somebody can't do remote code execution against your instance if you make it available beyond your local host. And it will also time out queries after 30 seconds by default. So if something's going to run for longer than 30 seconds, it will bail out. It will return to you an error that says timeout. You can change that. And also, if you access the Cypher query endpoint using the API, you can control what that timeout parameter actually is. So guardrails to help avoid foot guns, but all those guardrails can be bypassed if you would like to bypass them. In the future, we will have more UX to allow modification of and sharing of and adding of custom queries in this area. Right now, this feature just has these statically defined. So you can modify them if you change the source code, but there's not like an easy UX to modify these or to add or to share custom queries. But we do have that on our roadmap, and we'll have that feature in as soon as we can. Some other things to show in the GUI. You can manage your own profile. So I'm actually logged in with a BloodHound user called admin user with a role of administrator. So I can reset my password if I want to. I can also enable two-factor authentication. So you can do TOTP MFA with like Duo or Microsoft Authenticator or any other kind of TOTP provider to make access to your instance as this principal safer or more secure. You can also add other users. So if you want to give your colleague access to your instance, you can come to administration and then manage users, and you can create a user. So give them an email address, a principal name, first name, last name, an authentication method, and give them an initial password. Optionally, you can force them to change their password the first time they log in. And you can also give them a role. You can give them administrator access. You can give them read-only access, user access, or upload-only access, which is useful if you're going to automate data collection and ingest into BloodHound CE. You can also tie authentication to a SAML provider. So if you want to have, act like ADFS or Azure or any other SAML provider handle user authentication to BloodHound CE, you can set that up here. Adding files. So you would just drag and drop files onto the canvas here. Now to upload data, this is done asynchronously. So come to administration, and then you'll land at file ingest, where you can see a log of files that I've ingested in the past. And then if you want to add data, click on upload files. And maybe I have a file I can upload. I don't think I do. But the UX is very similar to what it used to be. So drag and drop those files here, or this will also bring up the common dialog if you click on this, and then hit upload. And what will happen next is it will start an upload and ingest job. So first, the files will be uploaded, and you'll see the status message say uploading. Once that's done, you'll see this status message change to ingesting. And at ingest point, that does a lot of post-processing to enrich the database and make things more accurate and faster. And then once that's done, the status will change to complete. I mentioned earlier, this is done asynchronously. So once the upload job is started, you don't have to stay in this view. You can go back to your Explore tab. You can keep working. You can run this in multiple tabs. So there's nothing stopping you from having, 2 or 3 or 20 tabs open, all doing different things, looking at different things in the data set.
It's also worth noting that the ingest process has been heavily optimized from legacy. Uploading data is significantly faster than it used to be. At this point, our biggest bottleneck is just insert speed into Neo4j, but we've tried to optimize it as much as possible outside of that. So you should have a much better experience with uploading the data, at least.
Yeah. One more thing to show with the GUI is, there's help available for these edges here by clicking on the edge and seeing the edge information. There's also like hints around the interface, or we try to design the interface so that it's mostly intuitive. We can't fit everything into the interface as far as help goes, so we have external documentation that you can access with the cogwheel and then hit docs and support. And that'll actually take you to our BloodHound support website, which covers both BloodHound Enterprise and BloodHound CE. And you can start to search for things in here. So for example, if I want to know about the different node types, I can come to this page and I can see, maybe I don't know exactly what an AZ web app is. So I can click on this and I can get information about what properties are they storing on these different node types. What are some related node types? So maybe the computer node, for example. References as well. So basically everything that we can't fit into the GUI, we have here in this external documentation. You can also submit requests for help here. You can also create an issue in our GitHub repo or talk in the BloodHound Slack, and we will help as best we can.
One more thing I wanted to point out on the GUI. A historical problem that we've had is compatibility between BloodHound and the collectors. So which collector goes to this version of BloodHound? We decided to simplify that. So in the cogwheel, you can just go to the download collectors page, and whatever collectors are in here will be compatible with the version of BloodHound you're using. So as we update collectors, as we continue to improve them, we'll update the collectors on this page. So you'll have access to that, and you don't have to, there's no more guesswork of going to GitHub and trying to figure out which release you need to grab for the version of BloodHound.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are ready to talk about the API. This is one of my favorite features. And so getting started with the API, first of all, everything that we've done so far, everything that you see in the GUI, all of it is driven by the API. And so the GUI, you could kind of think of it as being like a very, very fancy API client, but you can also create your own API client and you can query BloodHound CE through that API. To get started, come to administration, manage users, and then for your user that you want to create an API token for, hit the hamburger icon and do generate/revoke API tokens. And here I can create a token or I can revoke one. So I'll create a token, my cool token, save. This will pop this alert right here that gives you the token key and the token ID. This information will only be displayed one time. You cannot see it again. So you need to copy and paste this and store it somewhere. Once you close this, the information is gone and can't be easily retrieved, let's say. The GUI will not show it again. Everything is driven by the API. If you want to see help about how to query the API, come to API Explorer, where the Swagger documentation for the BloodHound CE API is stored. And so this covers BloodHound CE. It also covers BloodHound Enterprise. If something is available in one but not the other, you'll see, like for example, here the BloodHound CE logo is grayed out, whereas the BHE logo is lit up. So there is no EULA for BloodHound CE, but there is for BloodHound Enterprise. So this API endpoint is not relevant for BloodHound CE. But maybe I want to query like a user, for example. So here we can see all of the user entity API endpoints. I can access a user by its object ID using the URI parameters like this. And then you can also see an example of what the API output looks like just here in the Swagger tool. So let me find a user. Let's do this user right here. Here is the unique identifier for the user. So I'll copy that, come back to API Explorer, and then try it out. So this will then use my bearer token that the browser is using to authenticate with each request. to execute this query. And then you can see here is an example of how to do exactly what you just did with curl. Here is the exact URL that was used. And then here is the response. Here is the body. So it's just a JSON formatted object. And then the headers as well. If there were any errors, so if it was something besides a 200, you would see what the error output looks like instead. We have a PowerShell function that will make accessing the API a whole lot easier. It's not published yet, but I'm going to publish it as soon as I possibly can. And to show you that, I'm going to need to share a different window. So let me come to Zoom. Let me say new share and terminal. So here in my macOS terminal, I'm actually running PowerShell like a madman. And we have this PowerShell function called invoke BHE request. So this will do all the work for you to sign each request that you make to the API, provided you are supplying the token key, the token ID, the method, so post, get, etc., the host that you want to access, so like localhost on 8080, the URI of the API endpoint you're trying to hit, and then if you're posting and you have to include a body in that request, what the body of your request actually is. So this will do all the preparation for you to sign the request. And then it will just do a very simple invocation of invoke web request, also known as curl, kind of, in PowerShell. And then it will give you the output as the response object. So this is very, very easy to use. And as an example, I'm just going to create a few variables in PowerShell. So here's my token key. Here's my token ID. And then here's the BHE instance, or the, well, BHCE instance that I am accessing. It's localhost on 8080. And then say I just wanted to do like a very simple search for a node. Well, the endpoint for that is API/v2/search, where then your search parameter is in the queue value. So I want to search for any node where the name or the identifier includes this string admin. And I'm putting the result of that request into this search request variable. And once that's done, then I can access the result of that search by taking the search result, piping that to select, expand data, and then piping that to format list just to make it easier to look at. And so here are the different results that come back where the word admin existed in the name of the principal. And so here we have an Azure app, an Azure user, an Azure user. And these are all principals from our SpectreDev research tenant in Azure.
For those of you that are familiar with BloodHound already, you know that before the API, if you wanted to do this, you would need to write your own cipher for it. Writing cipher and learning it is in of itself a whole process. So having API access makes things like this significantly easier for either you or other integrations to consume without, having to access Neo4j directly and learn cipher.
Yeah. You can also do cipher requests. So let's say that I want to do some offline analysis. So as much as Rohan and I love the BloodHound GUI, we know that it's not the solution to every problem. But the information that it has can be valuable. And so let's say I just want to collect every computer that BloodHound knows about and then do some kind of offline analysis. There's a couple different ways you can do that. One way is you can access the cipher endpoint. and you can do your cipher query as part of the body of that request. So what I'm saying is I want to match every node that has the computer label and then return that. And then the result of that is going to go into this variable called collect all computers cipher request. So I'll hit enter. That's done. And then I will massage that output a little bit. And I'm going to say that my computers variable is going to be, let's say I'm like taking the JSON format from this result and I'm making it more palatable to work with, I think is probably the best way I can say that. After I do that, then I can work with this computer's object or variable, whatever you want to say. So I can see, like, for example, what the first one looks like. So here's a computer. Here is its label. Here's its object ID. I can also see just how many computers came back. So there are 4, not a very big data set. And so I can start to work with these. I could feed these to another tool. I could build automation to automatically consume this information from BloodHound, feed it into some kind of post-exploitation capability. I could also just work offline with this data in a way that's easier for me personally, that the constraints of the GUI don't enable. So the API is, for me, like my favorite thing. I think it's going to change a lot. I think it's going to create a lot of really powerful opportunity for people to do things like this. And so it's there. Here's an example, and then the PowerShell function, and also a Python example of how to query this API. We will have online as soon as possible, and we'll share that on Twitter and the BloodHound Slack and stuff. So I think that about wraps it up. I'm going to change my screen share back to the deck. So
looks like we've got quite a few questions as well.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and answer a couple of these. So the first question is, are there still custom queries? Where are they located? Is it still just one file, or can you have queries in multiple files? Custom queries are not in yet, but they will be as soon as possible. And the flow of how you modify those queries, how you update them, that might be a little bit different, but it'll be familiar enough that you won't have to like relearn a whole brand new system. So as soon as that's out, we will talk about it, blog about it, webinar about it. And so we'll let you know as soon as that feature is there. Here's another question. Are there any features of ye old BloodHound that have not been migrated over to CE? Yes, there are. So marking nodes as owned, right-clicking on nodes at all, and saying like shortest pass to here, set a starting node, things like that. There's a lot that did not make it into this release that we have marked as fast follow feature work that will be implemented. So anything that BloodHound Legacy has that BloodHound CE doesn't have yet, BloodHound CE will have it as soon as possible.
If you're in the BloodHound Slack, Stephen Hank, who's a member of our team, dropped a post not too long ago that has a whole list of all the fast follow-up features that were planned that are already planned to be implemented. The next question we have is, does this contain visibility for ADCS attack paths? It does not right now. This is definitely one of our priorities for the near future. This is something we're working on internally, and we hope to have some more exciting news as soon as possible, but yeah, no timelines currently. Next question is BloodHound Legacy compatible with SharpHound 2.0? The answer is sort of. Most files are compatible, but the most important one that is not is computers. In BloodHound CE, we changed our format for computers, so it collects some different information that is used in post-processing. So you will not be able to ingest those files. Similarly, older versions of SharpHound will have the same issue with BloodHound CE, where certain files will not work correctly. Another question, will BloodHound CE be able to run without Docker? I don't have a great answer for that right now. Feel free to hit me up in the BloodHound Slack and file an issue about it on Git. As of right now, the way we have everything set up is via Docker containers. Another question, is it backwards compatible with old datasets version? As I covered earlier, we did change the format for computers, and with it, the actual schema of the graph. So no, the new version of CE will require new data collection.
Here's a question that says, can you export those results? I imagine you might have been talking about these results here when you typed that question. If so, great. If not, let me know and I'll answer the question more specifically. So right now, you don't have like a one-click option to download these results. I would like to have that in there. Like, I think it'd be great to just click a button and download CSV or JSON or just the names or something like that. But right now, if you want to like download the results of this query, the best option is hitting the same API endpoint that this is hitting. Another question I think related to this is, how are the lists sorted on the right-hand side? I actually don't know. They're definitely not alphabetical. They're definitely not by node type. It might just be coming back from Neo4j in this order. I don't know. Rohan, do you know the answer to that?
I think it's just sorted by database ID right now. So whatever Neo4j inserts in there. But there's probably some opportunity to make the sorting a little bit more sane on this. So
yeah. Here's another great question: is any plans to make the lists searchable? Yes. So I think it'd be great if there could be like a text box right here, for example. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right under the outbound object control text, if there was a little text box that could be used to search the results of this list, I think that'd be great.
Another question we have here is, once you expand a graph, can you still search it? I believe you are referring to the old, as we called it, Spotlight. This is another feature that is on our list of fast follow-up items that we are going to implement.
This question about Docker only, I think you probably answered everything there, Rohan.
Yep. Next question is about file uploads. So the question says, my users.json file is over 1 gig and I get an error stating the file size limit is gig. We are aware of the file upload limitations. So we're internally working on a better solution to address these. This was kind of a limit that we put in as a QA thing, but we didn't really think it all the way through. So there will be more work coming on that should alleviate these problems. Just to round back up on the Docker questions, one of our engineers said that there is an example using Podman in the BloodHound Slack. So that might be something you can take a look at if licensing is an issue for Docker for you.
Here's a few questions. So this question says, is it possible to have the slide deck shared? Yes. So I can create a shareable link and I can put it in the Zoom chat, and I can also put a tweet out about it. Thanks for that question. This says, previous BloodHound versions had this very useful feature to mark users as owned. I couldn't find this in BloodHound CE. Will this be re-added in a future release? Yes, it will. We don't have a timeline for that, but yes, that feature will be implemented in BloodHound CE. This question says, can you cover saving custom cipher to the UI folder? And many likely are asking about designating a node as owned and timeline for the addition of that feature. So the custom cipher query stuff in this folder right here, this is hard coded right now. This is not easily modifiable, but we will have UX in the future to make this easily modifiable and make it easier to add your own custom queries in here. The owned feature that is in our backlog, we are working on it, but we don't have an ETA on that. This next question says, is there an ETA for some of the legacy features such as mark as owned and the backwards button? So mark as owned, just answered that. The back button, we are working on that, but we do not have an ETA on that yet.
Another question we have is the previous BloodHound allowed to export results of a view. This is actually, we were actually just talking about this internally, I believe yesterday. So this is another feature that is on our fast follow list.
This next question says, how can I save custom queries like in classic BloodHound? Right now you can't, but we will have that ability as soon as we can. This next question says, it looks really good so far. Regarding the pre-built query, I think it would be very useful to have a search box with search as you type on top of it to instantly find the query you want to run or to find queries regarding a topic. Matching could be any substring of the query name. I think that's a great idea. I'm gonna mark this as like a feature request for us internally, so that it's easier to find things in this list. I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that recommendation. This next question says, can I still use the legacy BloodHound GUI /client to access the new BloodHound server? Yes, you can. So the Neo4j database needs to be accessible. So you'll have to modify a block in your Docker Compose file, and it's annotated there, like what you have to change in that file to make Neo4j accessible. Then once it is accessible, then the legacy BloodHound client, you can just authenticate directly to Neo4j. That's going to work pretty well for now, but that's going to stop working eventually, or you're going to see things that will break with the legacy client and accessing the BloodHound CE database. But for now, it does work. And yeah, it will start to break in the future. This next question says, support for SSO via SAML, credential management using a tool such as CyberArk? Yes. So if your provider speaks SAML, then you can configure that here. With CyberArk, I would imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that CyberArk kind of becomes like an intermediary IDP between itself and the actual IDP, the actual canonical IDP. So if CyberArk has an ability to be configured as a SAML provider, then you can configure that here. Yes. I don't know that for sure because I haven't tested it, but I believe the answer is yes.
Okay. The next question is formal Kubernetes support for BloodHound CE on the roadmap? We have no formal plans for that right now. If someone comes up with some cool solutions for it, we'll be happy to link and attribute to it, but this is not something that our team is pursuing right now. Another question we have is, can one run diff operations between data uploads? Unfortunately, no. As a result of the way we upsert data into the graph, we only really have a coherent view of the current graph. This is something that we've thought about a few times. And Andy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No.
Yeah. Another question, does BHE use Neo4j on the back end? The answer is yes, it does. In the future, that will most likely be changing. Another question, is there a proper way to reach the Neo4j database for exporting CSEs? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by a proper way. This is all running locally. You can just change the port forward in the Docker config to exports or to port forward 7474, and then you can reach it the same way it's always been reached. Another question here, how are tier 0 objects marked as tier 0? Can we have tier 1, 2, 3, or mark assets to other tiers? The answer is not right now, but in the future, yes. This is something that we've wanted to support for a while, and we actually have we have some of the functionality already built, but there's still more work to be done before it's fully featured. Another question is, how is the ingest job work? Is it queued? So actually, when you upload ingest data, we store it on disk, and then there is a background process in the API that picks up those files on a set timer and ingests them into the database in a continuous, it's like I don't know what the right word for it is. It's just a process that continually runs in the background. Go ahead, Andy. You can take the next one.
So this question says, will there be a dark mode? Yes, there will. However, it's very low priority for us right now. There are other features that we want to get in before that. Personally, I prefer dark mode, and I'm eager to get it. But there's just bigger fish we had to fry first. But yeah, we will have dark mode eventually. This next question says, what would be the main difference between the community edition and the commercial one? So we have a page that shows the differences between all the different versions. I don't want to navigate to it right now, but Rohan, are you able to navigate to it and then like put that in the chat?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay. So yes, our product manager, Stephen Hink, has a good table that shows the differences between CE and BloodHound Enterprise. So Rohan will put the link to that in the chat. Here's another question that says, in BloodHound, you could clear the database from the GUI. BloodHound CE doesn't seem to have this implemented. Is this on the feature roadmap, or how are you supposed to clear the database in BloodHound CE? So we probably will reintroduce that back into BloodHound CE, being able to clear your database. Again, we do want to have like some safety rails around that. We don't want people to like accidentally do that. We also want to have guardrails against injection opportunities that the GUI makes available, through it having access to Neo4j. There's also 2 databases now. There's a Neo4j database and there is a Postgres database. So it's not as simple anymore as just clearing the Neo4j database. But long story short, we will have an ability for you to do that more easily or just at all with BloodHound CE. Until then, what you can do is you can, with Docker, you can get rid of the Neo4j data store, and then you can create a new one that will be totally blank. Or with access to the Neo4j database through the Neo4j console, you can clear the database that way as well. So a little bit finicky, not as easy as just pressing a button in the GUI, but eventually we will get there where it's as easy to clear the database as it used to be with legacy BloodHound. This other question says, is there a way to auto-upload the data via the API? Yes, there is. So this file ingest feature right here, this is making a call to the API. It's actually making several calls to different endpoints. And if you want to replicate that behavior yourself outside the GUI, you can do that. So the API documentation will help you to get started with that. It's not going to be very obvious, just by looking at this. But what you can do in the meantime is upload a file and then use the browser developer tools or proxy the traffic with burp to see what are all the different actions that the GUI is taking to do that. And then you can replicate that yourself outside the GUI with an API client. This other question says, can BloodHound CE be used offline? So this instance is running locally on my system. It is not running like in any cloud provider or anything like that. So it is running offline, if I understand what you mean correctly. If that didn't answer your question, please post another follow-up question.
Another question is you can no longer ingest zip JSON files. That's something that we intend to re-implement at some point in the future. So that is coming. Another question about analyzing past ingestion files. Yes, you will need to use BloodHound Legacy in order to analyze those. As I've said, the schema has fundamentally changed for computers, so it's just not going to work with BloodHound CE.
Here's a question I can answer. So this says, any chance of incorporating tier model violation validation within the new BloodHound CE? No. So that is a core feature of BloodHound Enterprise. That's a feature that we will not be bringing to BloodHound CE.
I just want to be aware of time here. It is past 3 o'clock.
Yeah. Let's answer like 3 more questions, and then any questions that we weren't able to get to, we will email you an answer as soon as we can. A couple I can see right now that I can answer quickly. This says, will BloodHound 4.x be maintained, or is this the successor? This is the successor. So BloodHound 4.x will not be maintained going forward. If there's some kind of like critical bug, we may be able to find time to address it, but otherwise, BloodHound 4.x, you should consider it to be deprecated, and BloodHound CE, which is BloodHound 5.0 going forward, that is what we are investing all of our maintenance into. So as soon as you can, stop using BloodHound 4.x and start using BloodHound CE.
Another question that we can quickly answer: can I run a collector using the API? SharpHound is still its own thing. There's no connection between SharpHound and the API other than the data that goes in. The other part of this question is, can I check attack paths? I'm not entirely sure what the question is there. If you're asking about pathfinding, pathfinding in the GUI is absolutely driven by the API. So yeah, you can query pathfinding data via the API as well.
Here's a good question. This says, will the next version have a faster install time? I think the install time right now is pretty fast, but yeah, probably. It'll probably get faster in the future. I think the rest of the questions we're not going to be able to get to, but we will answer offline by emailing you an answer, or we might do like spin up like a Twitter thread or something like that to answer questions there. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending the last hour with us. We're excited for you to use BloodHound CE. You can use it right now in about 40 seconds by typing this command. That's it. This will be recorded. It was recorded. The recording will be available at the same link, probably later today or tomorrow. And yeah, I think that's it. Rohan, any other parting thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks a lot for attending our webinar today.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.